Is that Sam? That looks like Sam. Surely that has to be Sam. Is it? No. Yes. No. Maybe. No. No. Yes. No. That's not definitely not Samantha. Yes. Is it? No. 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 Yes. 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 No. No. Hello, everyone. Today I wanted to talk about the entity scene in the Act 3 ending cutscene for the story missions in Modern Warfare Zombies. More specifically, who is the entity? I've seen a lot of theorizing from the community, which is great to see. I've seen a lot of potential answers for this question online, and the overall most common answer I've seen people come to regarding this is that the entity / announcer for this game could be Samantha. We'll be touching on these theories, and I'll be giving you precisely what I think's going on here. There's a lot of which I agree and disagree with, so let's go ahead and dive on in. To start things off, let's address something that I haven't really seen anyone touch on. The fact that the announcer is seemingly different from the quote-unquote big bad from the Dark Ether in this chapter of the story. If true, this is unprecedented in the scope of the history of zombies. At no other point in either of the two stories can I think of an instance of this ever happening before, aside from maybe Black Ops 4 with Samantha being the announcer in Classified, while also having Monty be a type of antagonist for that game, and overall the story at large, I guess. But that's still not as quite as pronounced as what we may have going on here, in my opinion. The entity in appearance definitely looks like it could be a woman, Samantha perhaps, while the announcer we hear in the map sounds very gruff and more masculine. And while yes, the gruff, distorted, corrupted sounding voice has always been a trope in these games, just comparing it alongside the silhouette of the entity and the little bit of dialogue we get there, I definitely get the vibe that they are two different things entirely. But that established, let's take a look at the announcer first. The first big conclusion or idea that came to me when first hearing this was that the announcer sounds strikingly similar to Sakov, otherwise known as the Forsaken from Cold War Zombies. I've asked around, and a lot of people both on Twitter and in our Discord seem to agree with this. Based on the similarities in the two voices and tones, it seems like it could genuinely be him. If this were to be true, this has pretty big implications, the biggest of which being that Zykov survives through and is important to the next game's plot. Another possibility here could be that the Society Occult, or Eddie's group, whatever you want to call them, could be using him to complete Project Janus. Perhaps what we're seeing in Modern Warfare Zombies could even be the final stages of enacting Janus, whatever it may be, but that's just pure speculation and conjecture. There are also some key questions that come from this, if this were to indeed be the case that the announcer is Zykov, some of which that come to my mind being Sporagmos' prophecy. In Season 6 of Cold War, Sporagmos, Dark Ether entity, prophesies that after the Forsaken was defeated, that the old ones, the old Elder Gods, would return. What does this mean for the Elder Gods that he consumed the essence of? Are they still out there? Another one being, did Zykov get redeemed? Seemingly no if he's controlling the zombies in this game. Why has Samantha allowed him to retake control? Will we actually kill him by the end of Modern Warfare Zombies? Does Ravov know anything about him being back in the Dark Ether? Even if it is the Forsaken, is it still Zykov? If Sam is still in the Dark Ether, is she in a stalemate with the Forsaken? As you can see, there is a lot that could come from this, but ultimately I was kind of driven away from this theory, mainly for the reason of, if it were to be the Forsaken, I don't really see a way in which they could do that in this game without it seeming like a rehash of Cold War Zombies, and that kind of turns me away from the whole thing with this idea, despite the two voices sounding very similar. So if the announcer isn't Zykov, then who is it? That's a question I kind of want to hold on to till later in the video. I do have a couple ideas for who this could be. For now, let's switch gears and talk about who people think the entity is. And the vast overwhelming response that I've been seeing here is that people think that the entity we see in the ending cutscene is Samantha. And I can see why. There's a lot of evidence for this. You, of course, have the silhouette. It looks like her. The voice sounds feminine. It sounds kind of like her, or a corrupted version of her, potentially. And the Jansen, her eyes turn purple. That's a nod back to Samantha. Ravenov even asked the question, do you remember? And that's also a nod to Sam's amnesia. There's a lot that points towards Sam here. But before we become too set on any one given interpretation of this cutscene, let's take a second to look at the facts. For one, we know the Dark Ether corrupts living things. In fact, Barrera has already made mention of this in this game, despite it being something that's fairly obvious. So, in my mind, that gives credence to the fact that it could be important here. Samantha did go into the Dark Ether at the end of Forsaken, and by this point, judging by what Zykov says, timescale wise, she would have been in there for roughly 360 years. But that's to say if she's even still in there at all. There's not really anything, aside from this cutscene, to suggest that she could be. In fact, there's a lot we'll probably see with her in the next game, which takes place in the 90s. So she could very well be out of the Dark Ether by this point in time in 2021. This line of thought definitely casts some doubt in my mind that it's her. But if it were to be her, some other things to keep in mind is Zykov became immensely corrupted and powerful in around about the exact same time scale as her. Zykov was in there for roughly 40 years, and Samantha, if she's in there, has been in there for roughly about 35 years. In Earth time, that is. Another thing to keep in mind is that, unlike Zykov, Samantha was already really powerful before she even entered. And with that, her mental state was also vastly different from Zykov. Whenever Zykov was in there, he was in a state of, oh, I have been abandoned. I sacrificed myself to end all wars and for humanity to rebuild from the ashes of World War II into something better. But they haven't, so I'm going to impose my order. She has entered with the mindset of, I'm sacrificing myself to save my friends and the world from this world-ending threat. But there's a lot that she has reconciled within herself as a person with her time spent at Block 8 with the director, kind of managing her powers and her thoughts and emotions. So the mindset between the two is very different here. So we really don't know what her motives would be in this game. Yes, Dark Ether corruption plays a key role here, but with what we've just discussed, would she be the same type of thing that Zykov was? Would she be wanting to take over the world? Would she be wanting to use the zombies to kind of accomplish that goal? And especially since we've already seen that side of her in the previous storyline, I just don't really see it. But nonetheless, I do think that's something that Treyarch wants us to be thinking about. They want us to be thinking that she could be this antagonistic force in the story of wanting to take over the world and all that jazz, you know? Because how similar it is to how she was in the previous story. Especially since you have all these little nods towards her in that one cutscene. The memory thing, the purple eyes, the silhouette, the voice, all of it points towards her, and that's definitely very intentional. Treyarch definitely want you to be thinking of her. But I think that's a red herring. I also believe the Zykov thing is a red herring. This is one of those things that it seems almost in a lot of ways too obvious to actually be the case here. And you could make the argument that that seems like a bunch of coincidences, and it might be. I might be looking too hard into this, but I definitely don't think that I am. So, if it's not Samantha, and if the announcer, assuming that it's a different thing, is not Zykov or something similar, what other options do we have? And going back to that radio I mentioned earlier, Barrera making mention of the Dark Ether corrupt and living things, he specifically mentions cloning. Now, Dark Ether cloning is something we already have lore for from Cold War. It seemed like a smaller tidbit of a world building thing for the Dark Ether and how it works. Basically, every time the Dark Ether comes into contact with something of our world, whether it be an object, a person, or even a place, it keeps a genetic memory of it, and thus can clone it later. This is why, despite, just gameplay stuff, this is why whenever you put a split megaton into the Der Wechsler in D Machina, it always turns into Orlov. All the megatons are Orlov, aside from the HVT megaton, which is Medvedev, the other the other person sitting to reactivate the cyclotron in 1983, but that's aside from the point here. But yeah, with that audio log in mind, the cloning mention, that opens up the possibility of what we see here being a Dark Ether clone of somebody we know. But even with that logic, something still tells me that's not the case here. And if you notice where I'm going with this, there's obviously an emphasis on they want us to think that this is Sam, that this is somebody we know. And as we discussed, there's a lot that points towards that in that cutscene alone. And this got me thinking in general. I don't think they would play the Samantha card this early on. But what they might do, and thinking from the perspective of the writer here, is that they might try to lead us on with that in order to kind of build suspense for her character arc. Like, is she alive? Is she in there? What's that look like in comparison to what we're going to get next year in the 90s? There's a lot we don't have for her arc, and she's obviously going to appear in that game. So if it's not her, but they want us to think it's her, that led me to be of one conclusion. It is Sam, but the question you should be asking here is, which Sam? That's right. I don't think the entity is Samantha. I think it's Samuel, Eddie's son. We had a lot of mention of this boy in Cold War Zombies that was built up as a dangerous person that Samantha kept having dreams about while she was in the Dark Ether and Firebase when we were trying to rescue her, and later on down the line with her quarantine at Requiem, with the whole situation of her amnesia. She kept having these dreams of this boy, and later on we've learned that Samantha and Weaver went on this operation to assassinate a high-value target that the CIA wanted dead, and that they accidentally burnt down the house with the kid inside. And with that, you naturally have this kind of inherent parallel between Samuel, this little dangerous kid, and Samantha in the previous storyline. They kind of feel the same sort of element in the story. With this, what do we see in Cold War in relation to this boy? You have the mystery box. Whenever the mystery box moves, you hear the boy laughing, and right there is a little stuffed animal. And immediately in our minds, the way Treyarch has set this up, the story, that immediately conjures the mental image of Samantha holding her teddy bear. And I think that's what we have going on here, really, with the entity being Samuel and the announcer being Mr. Peaks. Even now, with the Season 1 trailer being released a few days ago, there was an emphasis on Mr. Peaks. Like, it seems like he might be a tactical or something, but the emphasis on him specifically is really interesting, in my opinion. And another bit, a little supplementary evidence for this, is that whenever you move the mystery box in Modern Warfare Zombies, you no longer hear the laughing child, this thing we have come to associate with Mr. Peaks, and yet he's still there in the mystery box. So yeah, that's my theory. And if you agree or disagree, let me know down in the comments below. This could totally also be just a totally new thing in general. But with all the nods to Samantha, this definitely feels like they want us to think that it's somebody we already know. But at the same time, what they have given us feels like red herrings. If you enjoyed the video and you want to see more content like this, definitely consider subscribing and liking the video. We also have the next part of our How to Lore series coming up tomorrow. So I'll be seeing you then.